If you've been wondering why your Marvel Rivals matches feel like a coin flip, stick around because we're about to turn that coin flip into calculated chaos. We're diving into team compositions by breaking down exactly how they work, where they excel, and most importantly, how to win with them. We'll answer countering questions like what play styles work well against each other and plenty more. We're going to break down dive, poke, and control setups and explain overall structure and execution. So let's start from the top. How do these playstyles interact with one another? Dive beats poke by getting in their face. Dive comps excel at bypassing long-range pressure. They're built to close distances quickly and eliminate key targets before poke damage becomes relevant. Poke beats control by breaking them down safely. Poke comps thrive against control setups. They have the sustained damage output to break through defensive zones while maintaining safe positioning. Control beats dive by surviving and punishing. They have the survivability and defensive abilities to weather the initial burst and turn aggressive plays against themselves. Something to keep in mind throughout this video is team composition in Marvel Rivals isn't just about following a recipe, and just like how the original Avengers had some, let's say, team coordination issues, your composition choices can either create beautiful chaos or just regular chaos. And to add another layer to all of this, the meta right now is fascinating, and by fascinating I mean it's more complex than trying to explain the multiverse to an ant. While 222 gives you that perfect balance, triple strategist comps are like that one weird strategy that you wouldn't think works as well as it does, but it's incredibly strong in the right environment. And for those just joining us, 222 means 2 vanguards, 2 duelists, and 2 strategists. It's like a perfectly balanced breakfast, except instead of food groups, we're balancing who gets to punch what. But here's the thing, triple strategist compositions are showing up often and they're working. Why? Because sometimes the best defense is 3 people saying no from different angles. Let's talk numbers. There are literally millions of possible team combinations in Marvel Rivals. 2,324,784 with the current hero pool actually. But that's if you do every possible combination. And since you're probably not running a 6 tank setup more than likely, the more realistic combination total is 685,776, which is having at least 1 vanguard and having at least 2 strategists, because win rates fall off a cliff if you don't meet those minimum requirements. Now that we've established there's virtually endless possibilities and I couldn't possibly cover that in this video or for the rest of my life, what really matters is knowing 3 fundamental play styles that consistently win matches: dive, poke, and control. Think of these as the 3 infinity stones of team composition, except you actually have a chance of getting these to work. Core concepts. Let's break down these play styles, and no, I'm not going to give you some textbook definition that sounds like it was written by Dr. Strange after pulling an all-nighter. And if you're coming from Overwatch, you may be familiar with yet another composition term, Brawl, but we'll break down why control makes sense with how this video is structured. Let's start with dive comps. Dive comps are basically the we've got home field advantage everywhere strategy. The goal is simple: pick a target, make their life miserable, and get out before the enemy team remembers they have abilities too. Put simply, you dive in on the enemy team, often on their backline or an isolated target, do as much damage as possible, and then you leave, preferably before you're dead. Poke comps are the death by 1,000 paper cuts approach, except those paper cuts are arrows, energy blasts, and whatever cosmic energy Adam Warlock decides to throw around today. You're wearing down the enemy team from a distance. Think Black Widow here. You're generally playing back, often behind cover and or your vanguards, and taking pop shots at the enemy team whenever you can. Control comps. Think of them as the "this is my space now" strategy. You're not just taking territory, you're making the enemy team feel like they're trying to walk through one of Magneto's bad mood days. It's all about creating zones that say, "please take the long way around. Actually, just go back to spawn." Invisible Woman Psionic Vortex is an excellent example of this. You're generally not going to want to stand in that if you're the team on the receiving end of that. That's control. Thor pushing you up, down, off the point, off the map, that's control. Groot putting up walls in front of your face or behind your vanguard so they can't escape, that's control. And there is certainly overlap between these 3 playstyles. Some heroes can technically fit into every single playstyle even, but more often than not, a given hero will fit more into 1 or 2 playstyles rather than all 3, and they'll fit into one playstyle the best. If you're finding this video useful, consider subscribing. I upload weekly Marvel Rivals content, including guides, ranked gameplay, and more. Plus, it helps me convince my wife that me playing Marvel Rivals all day is actually research. More on dive comps. Boy oh boy do I have some info on this for you. Your core heroes here are basically the "we don't believe in personal space" squad. But here's what most guides won't tell you: dive comps aren't just about picking mobile heroes and using their abilities. It's about creating pressure points that are exceptionally difficult to deal with. Think about this constantly. Here's a list of the key dive heroes, and just remember, all heroes aren't locked to one playstyle. The goal of this video is to highlight certain strengths and how you can mentally approach the game, and maybe even change up a couple of your hero picks from time to time to better complement your team. Spider-Man. His uppercuts can seriously disorient unsuspecting victims' line of sight. Venom. Think of him as the "I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me" specialist. His kit literally includes diving. I have faith all of you know he's a dive character. Hulk. The subtle approach isn't in his vocabulary. He jumps in, punches, and jumps out. Rinse and repeat. Black Panther. Perfect for isolating targets with his mobility and burst damage. Iron Fist. His gap closing abilities make him a nightmare for more heroes than not. Wolverine. Sustainability meets aggression. He's like a blender with healing powers. Magic. Her teleports create chaos and split-second opportunities. Mantis provides the crucial crowd control for dive setups with her sleep and fast movement. Jeff the Land Shark, the adorable terror who can disrupt enemy positioning and flank from anywhere. Captain America, his shield charge and virtually unlimited tank ability creates perfect dive opportunities. Psylocke, her invisibility and movement abilities make her perfect for dive and delete plays. So to dive into this a bit more, let's talk about Spider-Man as an example, the poster child of dive comps. His "get over here" web reel isn't just annoying, it's basically saying, hey, you know that safe position you were in? It's mine now. Pair him with Venom and you've got a combo that moves faster than Jeff the Land Shark chasing a squeaky toy. But here's where it gets interesting. Dive comps in the current meta generally need what I call the safety net. That second Vanguard who doesn't necessarily dive isn't just there to look pretty, they're your insurance policy. Think of them as your "in case of bad decisions, break glass" hero. When your primary dive goes sideways, and trust me, it will, they're there to turn your "oh no" moment into an "actually this is fine" situation. Most of you have probably played in a comp like this, but an example here would be if you're running Spider-Man and you have Venom as a dive tank, you could also be running a Magneto or a Strange as your hold the fort down tank. This isn't a hard and fast rule that always needs to be followed, of course, but Strange and Mag are generally solid in any comp. Speaking of aggressive comps, let's talk about Iron Fist and Psylocke. When these two coordinate their dives, it's like watching a martial arts movie where the enemy team are the training dummies. Iron Fist creates the opening, Psylocke follows up, or vice versa, and suddenly the enemy strategist is having an extremely bad day. Now let's break down how this actually works on Hell's Heaven, for example. Those side corridors, they're not hallways, they're runways for your dive team. Here's a practical example. You send Captain America through the main path as a distraction. Yes, the most patriotic hero in the game is your bait. Deal with it. Meanwhile, your Wolverine and Mantis are taking the flank route. Cap throws a shield, everyone looks at the pretty frisbee, and bam, Wolverine and Mantis collapse on their backline faster than Hulk's anger management sessions fall apart. On Yggdrasill path, the dive angles are trickier than explaining why Moon Knight needs therapy. You've got the elevated positions that seem perfect for poke comps, but that's exactly why they're prime dive targets. Nobody expects the dive comp to go up instead of in. And here's where most dive comps go wrong, I would say. They dive in like they're trying to set a speed record for reaching the enemy spawn. Pro tip, timing is everything. Wait for cooldowns. It might take a bit longer, but it's worth it. Bait the cooldowns, like baiting out a cloak and dagger, dark teleportation. Boom. Now go in. If you're the Black Panther, you can lunge at an enemy strategist, then lunge out, no need to stay. They'll likely use their escape or CC abilities. Once you notice an ability has been used, you can dive again. Boom. Easy peasy. All right, let's switch gears and talk about poke comps, the social distancing experts of Marvel Rivals. And no, they're not just for players who are allergic to the objective point. Your core squad here is basically a masterclass in saying no from really far away. Hawkeye, Iron Man, and Hela are often staples in poke comps, but it's not just about standing back and throwing damage like you're trying to empty a pool with a teaspoon. When you've got multiple heroes who can all hold space from different angles, you're not just poking, you're creating a geometric nightmare that's difficult to deal with. Here are the poke comp heroes. Hawkeye, the master of you can't go there, or definitely not there. Iron Man, his repulsors are basically long range, please leave buttons. Star-Lord, consistent damage from short to medium range distances. Star-Lord can absolutely be divey. It's just different for him than others since he lacks the burst damage that others have. Punisher, area denial with extreme prejudice. If you've played Call of Duty, you've played the Punisher. Storm, weather control that makes enemies wish they'd brought an umbrella. She's essentially a flying Hela with a tad softer bite, but it still hurts. Speaking of Hela, Death from afar. Literally, he will smack you. Scarlet Witch, while not a stereotypical poke hero, her primary does damage based on the percentage of the enemy's max health, making her useful for whittling down unsuspecting large HP foes over time. She's excellent at repositioning with her free flight ability as well. Squirrel Girl, she packs a punch and even from around corners. Rocket Raccoon, while he can technically be dive, he's excellent at poke damage or straight massive damage if someone makes the mistake of getting too close to his rapid fire energy projectiles. With his healing orbs bouncing anywhere you want them to with the right angle, he can fit snugly into any comp though. Adam Warlock, cosmic powers that make enemies reconsider their life choices. His charge shot does considerable damage and with no fall off. Luna Snow, ice, cold damage from comfortable distances. She's got her freeze, which can be handy for dealing with the occasional pesky enemy who gets too close, and her ult is fantastic for controlling space as well, so you may think she's a control comp hero, and you wouldn't be wrong. I just wanted to highlight a lot of these heroes are better in certain comps than you initially might think, and although her ult might be seen as laughably long for some, it's only 12 seconds of the fight, and her freeze is on a 12-second cooldown after you use it, so what are you doing the rest of the time? Well, dancing, of course. Okay, but seriously, she's better than you'd think at poke damage. Black Widow, the queen of "you thought you were safe over there?" She's good at pew pew from a distance. Let's break down a perfect poke setup scenario. Picture this: Storm creating pressure from the high ground, and yes, Anakin Skywalker would be proud, while Hela's Night Sword Thorns are making the point look like an unfriendly neighborhood. Add Adam Warlock on the off angle, and suddenly the enemy team is playing a game of the floor is lava, except the lava is everything. Advanced poke strategies. Here's an interesting comp, and where the triple strategist comp shines brighter than Thor's lightning at a disco party, Luna Snow and Adam Warlock create what I call the pick your poison scenario. Luna zones with ice, Warlock with cosmic energy, and you can throw any other strategist you want into the mix. Adam and Luna provide quite a bit of poke between the two of them alone. You can throw in a Punisher for good measure here as well. He's there to make sure anyone who thinks they found a safe spot quickly realizes their mistake. The real art of poke comps isn't just in the damage, it's also in the rotation. You need to cycle your abilities constantly. Poke, 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 use ability, poke, other teammate uses ability, poke, and so on. Common mistakes alert: poke comps often fall into the just keep shooting trap. If you're just spamming abilities like you're trying to type your password while angry, you're doing it wrong. It's about controlling space and forcing reactions. Repositioning is key to a successful poke comp. It's important for any comp, but I feel it's easy to forget about repositioning when you're not physically up in the action or actively getting slapped in the face. Now, let's talk about control comps, the interior decorators of death themselves. A control comp in Marvel Rivals is all about dictating where the enemy team can and cannot go. Imagine it like being the architect of the battlefield. Instead of diving in to kill enemies or poking from range, control comps focus on creating no-go zones using abilities like Groot's Walls, forcing enemies to take unfavorable paths, again like Groot's Walls or Thor, gently nudging them down a different route, punishing enemies who try to push through these zones using heroes like Penny Parker's defensive setups or having high damage output abilities ready to shred into enemies since you know where they'll be. Think of it like this: if dive comps are about going to the enemy and poke comps are generally about hitting them from where you are, control comps are about making the enemy walk exactly where you want them to walk, usually right into your team's strongest positions, or it may be pushing them away from where you want them to be. A simple example would be using Magneto's various damage mitigation and push to force enemies away from the objective, while Doctor Strange places portals they can't walk through, essentially forcing them to either take a longer route or walk straight into the portal, leading the team off the edge of the map. It's less about getting kills directly and more about making the enemy team play the game on your terms. This is incredibly powerful. Control heroes include Magneto, the master of "no, you can't walk there, you have to go through me first." Mr. Fantastic, stretching the definition of personal space. Turns out pulling enemies around and having the ability to make them airborne is pretty good at controlling space. The Thing, it's clobbering time. But strategically. He can stun you, boop you, mitigate damage. Which do you prefer? Invisible Woman, she can push, pull, user psionic vortex. He's a fantastic control comp warrior. Loki, making enemies question which way is actually forward. His regeneration domain field ability is one of the strongest in the game. You can control choke points, objectives, or both at the same time with his clones. Human Torch, the human no-fly zone. His pyro prison firewall can encompass full teams and it does 50 damage per second. Doctor Strange, mystical area denial. His portal, shield, and AoE attack place him high on this list. Penny Parker, mech-powered space control. I think we've all died to Penny's pesky mines multiple times. She's excellent at controlling space on the battlefield. Moon Knight, multiple personalities, multiple ways to control space. The enemy is forced to split up or else you build your ult in 2 seconds. Cloak and Dagger, you can cover a bajillion miles with your ult, blind enemies, create a healing over time bubble for you and your allies, and deceptively long survivability with dark teleportation making you untargetable. Groot, the walking, talking wall. Put him up, do damage, buff yourself. Groot's amazing at control. Thor, lightning powered area denial. Your storm surge dash for yourself and displacing enemies would be enough to place you into this category alone, but add in lightning realm that deals damage, slows enemies, and regenerates your Thor force. You could say you're a Thor force to be reckoned with. Namor, underwater monarch of space control. He has squids. He has lots of squids. They slow you, they poke you. Facing Namor is a chore. Yes, I worked on a rhyme for that. Winter Soldier, he does a bit of everything and can fit into any comp. With his bionic hook and trooper's fist to displace enemies though, he comfortably fits in control. Control comps in the current meta need to be more flexible than Reed Richards and a limbo contest. Sometimes you're controlling space, sometimes you're the world's most stationary dive comp. The key is reading the room and understanding the flow of the game. What is the enemy running, for example? Advanced control strategies. Picture this. Penny Parker's mines are basically saying, this hallway? Actually a suggestion, not a path. Meanwhile, Namor is slapping down tentacles and making you play by his rules, and Moon Knight, well, he's doing Moon Knight things, and it's working. But here's where it gets really interesting. Cloak and Dagger creating pockets of nope, while Groot turns choke points into actual choke points. Loki stacking clones and using his regeneration domain spell fields. But here's the thing, adaptation and counterplay. Now let's talk about what happens when your perfect plan meets reality. Every composition needs a plan B, and sometimes a plan C through Z. When your dive comp keeps getting stuffed like a turkey on Thanksgiving, you need to adapt. Sometimes this means playing more like a poke comp until you find that perfect opening. Other times it means accepting that today just isn't your day to channel your inner Wolverine. For poke comps facing heavy shields, it's time to get creative. You need to be more unpredictable than Deadpool's internal monologue. Mix up your angles, change your timing, maybe even, I know this sounds crazy, walk forward occasionally. And when your control comp is getting dismantled, that's when you need to channel your inner Doctor Strange and start thinking in possibilities. Maybe your static defense needs to become mobile. Maybe your zoning needs to become more aggressive. Now let's talk about how to actually use these comps in real matches. And again, these aren't rules. You can use just about any comp on any map and see success, but my goal is to teach you how to fish, even if you're not a Namor main. On the Yggdrasill path, you might think dive is the obvious choice, but a control comp can turn those narrow corridors into the world's most aggressive museum tour. Set up Loki's illusions, add some penny mines, and suddenly the enemy team has a situation on their hands. For Spider Islands, mix it up. You could start with a poke setup, but be ready to change plans if things go south. Have Hela and Hawkeye create space while your dive specialists wait for the perfect moment. Counter strategies. We covered this a bit earlier, but what happens when the enemy runs these comps against you? Against dive comps, you could spread out like you're all practicing social distancing, or if you're dying to a Venom frequently and you're Luna Snow, play closer to your tanks, for example. Dive loses their effectiveness if you're turning and burning them real quick. Against poke, channel your inner Hulk and smash through their comfort zone. And control comps, sometimes the best answer is to just go somewhere else. Revolutionary, I know. Rotating is your friend. That's what I'm trying to say. Remember, these comps aren't just recipes you follow blindly. They're more like guidelines that occasionally work better when you break them. Sometimes the best dive comp is the one that knows when to back off, and the best control comp is the one that can suddenly turn into a dive comp. If you found this guide helpful, consider subscribing for more Marvel Rivals content. And if you haven't caught it yet, check out my latest positioning video here. Until next time.